There is violence and aggression in sport, and it is common to see athletes acting in an aggressive manner when they get frustrated or upset. For example, Serena Williams is one of the most talented athletes in the game of tennis. However, she does appear to have a lot of attitude. She has said disrespectful things to opponents in the past, and she's acted in a hostile way when she didn't get the goal she set out to achieve. Can you tell me a bit more about aggression in sport?
Yes, most people know that the media sometimes capitalizes on the situationalism that surrounds athletes and players and their aggression. Incidents of aggression are reported regularly. In sport, aggression is a characteristic that can have many negative effects on sporting performance and the overall outcome. Sporting games are always filled with anxiety and tension because athletes set personal goals and the viewers set a high tension because they're nervous that their team will lose. When you feel anxious, it can also cause you to become agitated and irritable, which does occasionally result in reacting with aggression. Social influence has an effect on how sporting professionals act because they should be persuaded to act responsibly as they are role models for many children and adults. In 2000, stated that to be able to label something with aggression, you need to meet four criteria, which are both physical and verbal behaviour, and it must include harm or injury. He stated that the types of aggressive behaviour are hostile, instrumental, and assertion. He showed that the main causes theories of aggression are the instinct theory, frustration aggression theory, and social learning theory.
So, there are many different cited definitions of aggression. Can you tell me more about these?
Yes, there are many different definitions of aggression in a sporting environment. In 1990, Bull described aggression as any behavior that has the intention to harm another individual by physical or verbal means. This definition is important because aggression is typically and mainly referred to as being physically harmful to someone, but in sport, verbal abuse can be similarly as harmful. Gill's four criteria was created in 1986 and was used to determine aggression. These four criteria consisted on whether the aggression was physical or verbal behaviour, whether it caused harm or injury, whether it was directed to another living human being, and it takes into account if the aggressive behaviour was intentional. There is a clear line between which can define the difference between aggressive behaviour and not. For example, accidental harm to someone is not aggression because it was unintentional. However, aggression is intentional behaviour which has the aim to cause harm to someone else. The idea of um, the idea of intent is usually interpreted by the referee, however, this can cause behaviour of aggression by the viewers if they believe that um, the view is wrong. Furthermore, aggressive behaviour may not just be physical, it could be psychological, for example, trying to embarrass the opponent and make them feel small and unimportant. Aggression is demonstrated between opposing team players, and as well as that, the viewers supporting each team can get aggressive towards one another if their team loses a game.
So, my understanding is that there are three main types of aggression, and they're seen constantly in sport, and they include hostile, instrumental, and assertion aggression. Is that right?
Yes, there are different categories in sport in which aggression has been defined into. These were recognised by Silva in 1983. The two main types of the two main definitions of aggression are hostile and instrumental. Hostile aggression refers to the violent attitude or and actions that are correlated with anger and the desire to dominate a sporting situation or other players. For example, specifically targeting aggression towards the best player on the football team by tackling them or pushing them over. It can be displayed in verbal, non-verbal, and physical ways, but the main point of hostile aggression is that it has the intention to harm others. For example, in hostile aggression in basketball, repeatedly hitting and shoving players and targeting the main player with aggressive and insulting behavior is hostile aggression. Instrumental aggression refers to an aggressive behavior intended to achieve a goal in the sport. For example, accidentally shoving someone when sprinting after the ball. For example, they're determined to reach their goal, however, on the way they do cause harm to someone else, but they didn't have the intention to. It is made against another person who the aggression is used as a way of securing the same reward or achieve a victory in the game. Assertion is about being confident in your abilities and being able to be confident to stand up for yourself and your beliefs while maintaining respect for others on a playing field. In sport, aggression is a characteristic that can have many negative as well as positive effects on performance, which is known as assertive behaviour, where the players will play within the rules of the sport and at a very high intensity, but will have no intention to harm the opponent. Wiggins James et al. States that it's important to realise that acts of aggression may be interpreted differently depending on the nature of sport. Sport is about a range of specific activities which involves competition and requires physical conditioning and skill. For example, the aggression seen in boxing will be different to the aggression which may be shown in tennis, for example, because boxing is a much more aggressive sport in nature. Sanctioned aggression is where a person has the intent to harm, but that is within the rules of the sport. For example, boxing has the aim to hurt the opponent by punching them. However, in tennis, this is unacceptable and out of nature. Coaches are responsible for training athletes in a sport by analysing their performance and encouraging them. However, coaches have notorious nature of forcing their team to target the opponent in a negative way. Coaches will always support their team both emotionally and physically and will have the desire for the team to succeed. However, if they can see a strategy which involves aggression towards the other team to make their team win, they may persuade their players to act in a hostile way towards them. Coaches and all players know that both instrumental and hostile aggression involves an intent to do harm, which is discouraged at all levels of competitions. Though instrumental aggression doesn't have the intent to cause harm, if harm is caused, this is unacceptable in general. Colombo and Pfister in 1998 conducted a study looking at aggression at high-level sport in which they found experienced athletes used more instrumental aggression, which they used to their advantage, and hostile aggression was used less frequency because it had more negative consequences. This research shows that athletes use self-control to help them with their aggression. Langer and Jakubowski highlighted the lack of differentiation as their study indicated that some people's mistakes that some people mistake assertiveness for rudeness and aggression. For example, if a person's playing basketball and is running down the pitch and pushes into a person in their way, they had no intention to harm, but the player had a goal in which they needed to train and they did cause harm to someone else.
Lots of aggression can be caused by particular triggers, and in sport, these triggers can sometimes predict aggressive outbursts. What are some examples of stimuli which cause aggression?
Yes, well, players can put pressure on themselves to succeed, and when their personal goal isn't achieved, this can cause high level of disappointment and aggression, which can be turned into a form of aggression and can cause them to lash out verbally or physically to those around. Furthermore, if the referee gives a foul to a team player which the athletes do not agree with or the viewers, this can cause high levels of anger and irritability, which will cause them to be aggressive. Having pressures from a large crowd can cause arousal and a bit of anxiety, and if something happens during the sporting activity to frustrate them, any other stimuli can also cause aggressive outbursts. Other examples of when people can become aggressive during sporting activity is when there is a related incident which could have caused them, an unrelated incident which could have caused them to be aggressive. For example, outside problems such as money issues, domestic relationships. Sporting professionals can also act in retaliation towards the opposing team if they've harmed one of your fellow players.
What are the different theories explaining aggression, including instinct theory?
Well, there are four main theories of aggression. These are the instinct theory, which is trait, social learning theory, which is situational, frustration aggression hypothesis, which is interactionalist, and aggression cue hypothesis, which is also interactionalist theory. The instinct theory explanation was initially created by Freud in 1920 and carried on later by Lorenz in 1966. He found that the tendency of aggression is an innate, independent, instinctual disposition which is built within us, and it consists of the most powerful obstacle to culture. Freud describes that innate and genetic drives or instincts to be sexual and aggressive are animalistic and have developed for survival through natural selection. An athlete's inability to be aggressive builds up over time before being expressed. This suggests that behaviour is always predictable as there is cues. It can be described through displacement, where urges are acted upon but are directed at a different target. For example, a different team player who may have been mocking and taunting your fellow players. However, sublimation is a different way that aggressive urges are handled, such as being transformed into something socially acceptable but is controlled. For example, aggression builds up and it is displaced and released into something which is more socially acceptable, such as the which is explained by the catharsis theory. However, for a different person, they could experience an aggressive build up and then just attack someone, which is socially unacceptable. Although the instinct theory is good at describing aggression levels of aggression, it could actually tend to increase in sport and not decrease as Freud suggested. And no innate aggressive characteristics have ever been found, and there is no support found for catharsis. Catharsis theory also argues that aggression is a neutral, internal motivation which has the compelling need for release through physical action within a controlled environment, said Bussmann et al. In 1999. Similarly, the more recent reversal theory shows that contact permanently sports such as Contact permitting sports such as boxing are predominantly opted for due to opportunity to exert a certain level of aggression through the nature of prey. For the social learning theory, Badurus SLT suggested that a behaviour is learnt through environmental factors and significant others through which their behaviour is observed.